You will use cover crops. You will use them often and creatively. I, the Sandman, have spoken. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liz Colby, and I'm with Practical Farmers of Iowa. Accompanying me behind the scenes and providing technical support is Hannah Grospeach. We will shortly be broadcasting in the field with Rob Faux of the Genuine Fox Farm in Tripola, Iowa. And if we're lucky, we may also be joined by one of the farm's spokescats. Together, they will offer us additional wise words and commentary on the myriad creative ways Rob implements cover crops before, after, and within and among a variety of vegetables and chickens. Today, we're focusing on cover crop termination and turnaround to planting. But first, like an old movie, we'll start with the credits at the top. We'd like to thank our major sponsors for their support of our virtual field day season. Their support helps make this field day season possible, which features over 60 virtual field days. And guess what? You can attend all of them free of charge and find the recordings on our website and YouTube channel. So thank you, sponsors. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a farmer-led nonprofit based out of Ames. We specialize in farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing and farmer-led research with a mission to equip farmers to build resilient farms and communities. All are welcome at PFI, and we invite you to learn more about our organization and access our vast collection of resources at practicalfarmers.org. This virtual field day will run until 1:05 p.m. Central Time. If you have questions for Rob during the field day, please type them in the comment box on Facebook, and I'll do my best to relay them during the discussion. And at the end of the event, give us your feedback via the online survey that Hannah will post in the comment box. These virtual events are new to us this year. I think we're getting better, but we're always excited to learn more and improve and get ideas from the viewers. All right, Hannah, let's go live to Rob in the field.
Yeah, that looks like me.
Yeah, there you are. Hi, Rob.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm going to turn things over to you because I know you have a lot to show and share with us today. So take it away.
Sure. So as many of you heard, my name's Rob Faux. It's spelled F-A-U-X. So if you know French, you know that means false or fake. And I work at the Genuine Fox Farm, or the Genuine Faux Farm. We are a real farm, or at least a changing farm, I should say. We have been in operation since 2004, and we have been in production for vegetables and poultry, and we are a certified organic operation. Our farm is about 15 acres in size, and we're located northwest of Tripola, Iowa. And it makes sense that we'd be by Tripola because it's spelled like Tripoli and sounds like Tripola. Our name is spelled like Faux, and we sound like Fox. So we fit in very well here. We have been running a CSA operation since 2005 until last year. And this year we are converting our farm to respond to a few things. One of those things is that we've had changing demand. And the other thing is that our farm is on very flat ground with heavy soils, and we've been getting a lot more rain in the last few years. So this gives us an opportunity actually to do this field day, this series of field days in a way that maybe wouldn't be constrained as much by vegetable crops. And we can try and do a little experimentation. So during the series of 3 field days, I'm kind of hoping to take you through the process of where we have terminated some things in the field to prepare for another crop. And then we're going to end up seeding some, and hopefully in the next 2 field days, you'll get to see how those cover crops progress up to the point perhaps for the earliest termination to be terminated even at the last one. So we're kind of looking forward to doing that. We have done a couple of things on the farm. What you see in the background is our largest fields in the east, and we used to have these things oriented a different direction, and we're now running it the long ways, and we're trying to put in ditches to try and handle excess rain. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're doing on the farm. Liz, could we go ahead and go to the layout slides real quick on the PowerPoint?
We can. Hannah's going to pull those up. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I got this. I wanted to show this real quick. This is a layout of our farm as it once was. And what you see on the right-hand slide are the fields we're standing in now. And that right-hand slide, or that right-hand area of the slide, had 7 plots in it. And I want you to take note before we come back later on and show the field that there are grass and clover paths between each of those 7 plots. And that will actually play a role in what we did with termination of some of these things. And we'll talk about that later. But what I'd like to do first is I like to run through some of our favorite and maybe not so favorite cover crops. And the first one is the Berseem clover, and that would be the next slide. Berseem clover would be one of the cover crops that we used early on. And to make things very clear, early on our farm, our biggest piece of equipment would have been a lawn tractor with a tiller attachment on it. So there probably are people out there who are maybe seeing this field day that are in the same position where they don't have big equipment, but they might like to put in some cover crops. And we found Berseem clover was probably one of the clovers that was easiest for us to terminate. It tends to winter kill. So we could even allow the winter to do the work for us. Berseem clover was good for fixing nitrogen. It wasn't particularly good for giving us a whole lot of biomass, but otherwise it was an easy thing for us to handle. It didn't cover the ground very quickly. If you look at that picture, you'll notice there are a few grassy weeds in the middle of it. But as far as an introductory cover crop, it worked pretty well for us. But in recent years, when we use Berseem, it tends to be with another cover crop. We tend to mix it in. Let's take a look at the buckwheat. That'd be the next slide. So what you see here is you see buckwheat in flower. It's about at the point that we would be wanting to terminate it because we want to avoid letting those flowers turn into those nice hard seeds that buckwheat makes. It's not that I have a problem with buckwheat reseeding itself because it's one of the easiest covers to terminate. For the most part with the buckwheat, all you end up having to do with it is mow it down and you've pretty much taken care of it. And if you end up having some that go to seed, when they pop up, they're pretty darn easy to control. But if you don't control them, the big thing about buckwheat is the fact that it is a smother crop deluxe. It germinates rapidly. We've had it germinate as quick as 2 days in perfect conditions. It covers the ground rapidly, and this is my go-to if you have problem with Canadian thistle. We tend to take a Canadian thistle area and throw buckwheat on it in hopes that it will smother out and slow down Canadian thistle. We love the buckwheat for our vegetable operation because it is so fast to get to maturity. It's something that you can put in between a spring crop and before a fall crop, and you don't have to worry about it being hard to work into the ground. The ground tends to be fairly easy to work after this has been used. So it's one of our favorite cover crops to use in a vegetable operation. We also like it because the flowers are fantastic for the pollinators. If you have honeybees on the farm, they love buckwheat flowers. And it's just a good thing to have. One of the things I like to do with buckwheat is I would love to put it close to some of our squash crops later in the season. And that would encourage more pollinators and perhaps increase your production. We had an increase in production with our melons one year when we put a couple strips of buckwheat in there. Next slide would be field peas. Field peas is another of those that we use a little less on the farm, but it's an easy one to terminate again. This one we typically use late in the year. So we would probably put this one in, I'd say in a couple of weeks, and then we would allow it to winter kill. But you can try and start it early. It's just that on our farm with the wetter soils and wetter conditions, we're just not always able to get in there and get the field peas in. Field peas tend to leave a lot of bare area, so you get other things popping up amidst them. So it's not always my favorite if you're trying to cover ground and cut down on the weeds, but it's good for fixing the nitrogen. Let's go to the millet. That's the next slide. All right, so what you see is you see buckwheat in the back, and towards the front, you'll see the grassy area that would be Japanese millet. Japanese millet is one of my favorites as well. It's one that we started using after doing cover crops for a few years. It establishes relatively quickly. We tend to seed it very heavily because we want it to cover and we want no competition. And the thing about Japanese millet that I've really noticed is that it's a really wet cover. And what I mean by that is if you cut it, the grasses are very wet. So if you decide to terminate it by mowing and perhaps doing more, you're going to find that if you don't have a decent sized mower, you're going to clog up pretty easily. So we tried Japanese millet before we had bigger equipment. We tried running our lawn tractor through it, and it got pretty well clogged up with the amount of moisture that Japanese millet has. On the
Rob,
other
do
hand,
you know how thickly the seed rate you're using for the Japanese millet?
the question is whether I know what the seed rate is for the Japanese millet, and what I can tell you there is that I use a seed rate that's well beyond what anybody recommends.
Okay, good.
If you go to Albert Lee Seed, they typically have seed rates listed there, and it's pretty common for me with Japanese millet to probably go 50 to 75% beyond their seed rates. What you need to remember is I'm not necessarily looking for a long-term cover. I'm looking for quick and very, very dense because I want to outcompete everything else. And Japanese millet seems to do well with a dense seeding rate, as does buckwheat. There are a few others that don't particularly like it if you go beyond the recommended seeding rates. But I do like, I tend to use Albert Lee's numbers as my basis, and then I go from there. Hopefully that answers the question well enough.
Yep, fantastic.
All right. Let's go to the tillage radish. That's the next one. So here's, you just asked about seeding rates. I thought this would be a good one to follow, I guess. Tillage radish. This is a picture of tillage radish that has been seeded way too closely. I used some of the same logic with tillage radish as I did with things like millet and buckwheat. And tillage radish is not really intended to cover the ground as much as it is to develop good roots and break up the hardpan in the soil. And so you probably want to have a little bit lighter seeding rate, and I would go with exactly what Albert Lee suggests as far as that's concerned. I don't remember the amount offhand, but go with their suggestion because you want them to develop good, strong roots and break the soil. We do not use tillage radish much anymore because we've done a pretty good job of breaking the old hardpan in our fields. But also we tend to grow and have grown a lot of brassica crops. And the whole point of tillage radish is to put it in and let it winter kill, and it rots in the soil, and it's going to potentially introduce some diseases that brassicas have problems with. And so we tended to start moving away from the tillage radish as soon as we felt we dealt with some of those compaction problems. I think you'll find other farms like ours, it's the same kind of thing. We appreciate what tillage radish can do, but a lot of us end up not using tillage radish. And then I think we've got sun hemp next. And there's a picture of sun hemp. Sun hemp's a warm weather cover crop, and it's a long growing cover crop. And it tends to outcompete by making a nice canopy fairly quickly. We actually drilled this in at about 6-inch spacing and put them in, and they took off pretty quickly. What I like about the sun hemp is the fact that it really establishes well, and it is a long season cover. The other thing I like about it is you can just let it winter kill and just let it be cover for the duration of the winter. So it's also a wildlife cover, etc., and then you can incorporate it in the spring. I would not use sun hemp as a quick turnaround cover crop. You're not going to get that much out of it if you do, but you'd also be surprised by how quickly I think it grows. It can get to as much as 6 feet to 8 feet high, depending on conditions and how long you let them grow. So sun hemp's one of the ones we tend to like. And then the next slide just shows a list of a few others. I wanted to point out the annual ryegrass for those who might be in the field day that are thinking, okay, I'm new to this and my farm is small. Our very first cover crop was annual ryegrass. Its advantage is that it should winter kill. Its disadvantage is that it doesn't always winter kill. It has an advantage that it works very well with Berseem clover as a mix. It can be grazed by chickens fairly easily. You can just end up putting your animals out on it if you want. You can terminate it after a short period of time, or you can let it run for a full season. And the big deal about it is that it's a fairly easy one to handle with small equipment. It doesn't get too large. It's a lot like a lawn, hence annual ryegrass. The others that you see on there, I'll mention that the Phacelia was an experiment that did not go particularly well. We had trouble with the seeds germinating, although I like the idea of Phacelia. It's a very good bee attractant. And then the clovers, of course, we tend to put clovers into our cover operation. They're often part of a mix, though we've tried to use white clovers in between production rows and red clovers. We tried doing just a straight red clover cover one time, and that didn't cover particularly well unless we wanted to let it go for a longer period of time. So that kind of gives you some of those. The ones on the bottom are some cover crops we don't really have a whole lot of experience with on the farm, partly because of what we do and partly because of the equipment we had at the time we were really experimenting. And frankly, I love some of the ones we've discovered. So this is where sometimes farmers fall into ruts. So I found ones I like and I tend to stick to them. But if I were looking to do something else, I would probably be working on trying to get a vetch cover crop into our operation. You just have to work on different termination practices. And that pretty much covers our cover crops.
All right.
That was a
something
quick...
you, yeah, a very quick overview of everything you love and some things you don't. Do you want to talk next about things that we're looking at in the field, or go to the videos?
Let's go ahead and go to the videos, and then we can kind of traipse around and look at some of the field after people have seen them. So the first video we want to show is of a rotary harrow. We're talking about terminating covers. And the rotary harrow is a PTO or powertrain driven piece of equipment. We have a 45 horsepower tractor that we run with this thing.
All right, Rob, we've got the sound down, so you can keep talking over the video if you want to.
There you go. Yeah, so what you're going to see is we're going to just run a real short area with this rotary harrow. If you look at it carefully, and probably we'll loop back around on this, the next time that we come back to the front of the video, look carefully at the equipment and notice the rotation of the tines. Unlike a regular tiller, which would roll over the top, this thing has kind of a mixer motion. So they're running in circles, and we're not trying to turn soil that's deep down in the soil up to the top. We're just simply stirring the soil. So we're hopefully keeping the various strata of the soil in the same location. What we're hoping is happening here is we're not pulling up weed seed bank seeds from further down. So that's part of what we're doing. The other nice thing about it is it has a tendency, rather than burying weeds or chopping up weeds, it has more of a tendency of grabbing the weeds with the roots and kind of pulling them. So it ends up pulling them out to the surface of the soil, and it ends up leaving them out on the ground so they'll desiccate and be easier to incorporate the rest of the way if they need to be incorporated. So I particularly like this piece of equipment. Now I think you can see the tines moving or in that mixing motion right about there.
And Rob, can you tell us what size tractor you're using to pull that, and where folks can pick up a rotary hoe? Did you get this at an auction? Does somebody make them?
Yeah. So this particular rotary hoe we were able to get from Nultz. They're located north of us. They're in Iowa. They can special order these. And our tractor is a 45 horse. So you can get a rotary hoe that matches various sizes, although I don't know that they had anything that was much smaller than a 30 horse. So I wouldn't go much lower than that. As far as cost, it cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of about $5,000. So it is an investment. However, I think it was a worthwhile investment. It has done a few things for us. In particular, we had some trouble with Canadian thistle on our farm. It was an inherited problem that we had. And we're noticing that this is helping us control Canadian thistle because it is grabbing those thistles and yanking them up to the surface and allowing them to desiccate. Whereas with a tiller, it chops up the thistle and all that does is create more thistle plants. So it's helped us with that as well as other things. You might notice if you're talking about a smaller farm, if you've got a BCS walk-behind tractor, there are rotary harrow attachments for those. We do not have one of those, but we do know a couple people who do, and the reports have been positive. Does that answer those questions pretty well?
It does indeed. And which cover crops are you normally using this on?
We can use the rotary harrow on most anything that isn't too viney. So if this is part of the reason we don't use vetches, a hairy vetch is particularly viney, and all it would do is wrap around the tines and gum it up. So we tend to stick with grassy covers, clover covers, pretty much everything I mentioned except the vetches. This would work. I wouldn't use it, of course, for the tillage radish because I don't intend on incorporating tillage radish until it's the spring after. And at that point in time, it's all rotted. It doesn't matter. But it's kind of it's a nice tool because you can use it for all kinds of situations. It's almost too nice of a tool. It encourages you to use it too often. And those who know Andy Dunham, he preaches that you can certainly overtill, and you tend to overtill more when the tool works really well. And this tool works really well for us for what we do. So we've worked real hard to try and not allow ourselves to overdo it.
All right. And Hannah, why don't you run that video to show the soil after the rotary harrow?
So what you're seeing here is this is immediately after using the rotary harrow. You saw us incorporating a grassy cover, and I just wanted you to see what it looked like. It's kind of skipping around a little, but the soil is actually, it still has a lot of structure to it. It's not a fine, sandy structure, but it's still loose, it's friable. We can still crush it with our hands. The soil content or the soil moisture is pretty good at the point that we did this. So it's a nice tool. It does a nice job of preparing the soil. A person could potentially plant something like potatoes into this. It might be a little rough if you have to do finer seeding, so you might have to do something more after this. But it works the soil really well, and it doesn't destroy the soil in the process.
Excellent. Let's see, should we go along to the moldboard plow?
Let's go to the moldboard plow.
All right, Hannah, should bring it up. I'd like to give Hannah a good computer workout during these field days.
And she does a fine job too. There we go. Some people know this is a 2-bottom plow. It's a moldboard plow, and we don't use it all that often on the farm, but when we do use it, it tends to be because we've got a cover that has lots of roots, lots of root density. So if you were going to do a sorghum Sudan grass or something along those lines where you're looking at some really heavy root density, maybe an alfalfa, then you might want to roll it over with the 2-bottom plow or the moldboard. You'll notice that it tends to leave some pretty big chunks. So if you're a vegetable operation with small tools, it's going to leave it in conditions that are going to be hard for you to work. But if you got some bigger equipment, then you can certainly handle it. You'll notice that a lot of the Amish and Mennonite farms still use the 2-bottom or various kind of moldboard plow at the end of their seasons for certain fields. And they'll turn it over at the end of the season and leave it turned over for the winter. I think that shows that pretty well. So let's just go ahead and go right to the disc, because when we did that, it left a lot of clumps. It left a lot of hard stuff to work with. So we decided to go over it with the disc at that point in time. So let's see if we can show that thing. There you go. This is a tandem disc that we have for our tractor, and we're using it to try and break those larger clumps down. Needless to say, we didn't do a whole lot of two-bottom plow. We just wanted to demonstrate how it works. I wasn't really wanting to do much. I just wanted to show everybody how it did its thing. And when you run the disc over the two-bottom plows area, it's not going to make it perfect for planting immediately after. You're going to have to let things kind of mellow out a little bit before you think you're going to do more with it. But it sure does give you some options if you want to do some larger or some heavier, denser rooted cover crops.
And so, Rob, are there cover crops that you're using the disc on? Do you just follow the moldboard plow with the disc, or when else do you use the disc for your cover crops?
Yeah, as far as the cover crops with the disc are concerned, we'll show you this in a little bit here. But sometimes you'll notice some of the cover crop or some of the weeds that come around with the cover crop have survived when you use the rotary hoe. And so one of the things that I have done a couple times is I will run over it before planting with the disc so that I'm not beating the soil to a pulp once again with the mixing action of the rotary hoe. The disc is a little bit kinder to the structure of the soil. So what we'll do sometimes is we'll say, well, okay, we ran the rotary hoe. It left a lot of weed residue or a lot of cover crop residue behind. We need to get that terminated the rest of the way so we can plant. So I'll run the disc on that. The disc is not particularly good, by the way, by itself to terminate any cover crop that makes even any approximation of a sod. You could probably use a disc to terminate, easily terminate things like buckwheat. You might be able to terminate field peas. Yeah, you could probably do that. You could probably do berseem and some of the smaller clovers. But if you're going to get into the millets or some of the other things, the disc is probably not going to do it for you by itself. I think that moves us through that one pretty well.
All right. Well, should we take a little hike and see the spots you wanted to show us?
Yeah, let's take a little hike now. So forgive me while we start moving.
Yeah, and we're just getting a little bit every once in a while your audio lags, but I think it's just you know, not a big deal. So we'll keep on keeping on.
All right, here we are moving around. All right, so here's what we got for our Exhibit A. This is an area where we decided to just try and use the disc.
Rob, your
yes.
fingers over the camera.
I hate it when that happens.
There you go.
So this is our first exhibit. This is just disc. And if we come out here and take a look at it, you'll notice I can't get in very far into the soil. We still have some of the plants are still pretty well rooted. And it's going to take more passes to actually do anything with this. So if you're going to want to try and plant something in it yet this year, the disc by itself wasn't enough. And this is actually a couple passes with the disc. And you'll notice a little bit further on, we have some that looks like it's a little bit better right in here. And it's just sometimes you manage to hit something and the disc gets better purchase and it pulls it up. But we would have to go over this multiple times with the disc. But the soil is still pretty nice. Mm-hmm. So we got that one. Let's show you this one over here. So this
Rob,
is the area.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead and move to another spot maybe. So we dropped your audio for a second. So just maybe pick another spot to.
Yep. How's that?
That's good.
Okay. So this is the area that you saw us run the moldboard plow and then go over that with the disc. So you notice we've done a pretty good job of rolling the cover crop over. I'm sure if we get a rain, you'll notice a few clumps are probably going to go ahead and survive if we get rained on, but it's not going to be too bad. And if you look at the soil down here, I don't know if you can see that well enough.
Hold it up in front of there you go.
Like this?
Yeah.
You get some clumps. So, and you still have a little bit of root mass in here. So this is, again, if you're a vegetable grower and you're hoping to plant something into this, this is going to take a little time before it's ready to go. But it's not bad. It's actually in pretty good shape. All right, we're going to move over a little. All right, Liz, are we still with you?
Yes, I'm here. And you're
Fantastic.
there.
This is good. All right, so we've got a wider strip here, and this is a strip that I ran the rotary harrow on about 8 days ago. So you can kind of see we still have some survivors as far as that was concerned. But if we look down here at the soil, this is the same area that I showed everybody in the video. That's pretty nice condition right down there. It's in pretty good shape. It's pretty loose. And in fact, if you got anything in here still, they pull out pretty easy. So it's good conditions, but again, you know, if you're trying to plant vegetables in here, you might be a little dismayed by how much green is still out here. But let's move over a little more. This is what it looks like after we run a disc over the same area that we had the rotary harrow. And I ran the disc today. So prior to the field day, I ran the disc over this. It looks pretty clean, looks like it's ready to go. You could potentially, let's look at this soil. You could potentially plant in this without doing anything else unless you're doing a fine seed. And if you're doing a fine seed, then maybe you'll go over it with your tiller or whatever you do to prepare your seed bed. But generally speaking, this looks pretty darn good to me.
And Rob, do you do any stale seed bedding after incorporating a cover crop?
Do I do any stale seed bedding? The answer to that is I would love to. The honest answer is I never managed to because time always runs out for that kind of thing. And rains just don't seem to cooperate with us. If we want them, we don't get them. And if we don't want them, we do get them. Just the normal stuff. So I guess in answer to that question is if I had a perfect world, I would. But I don't. And so I almost never do. I have managed to do that one time, and maybe we'll see if we can accomplish that with this experiment over the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Well, what else? Is there any other fields you want to show us out here?
Yeah, I got one more. Let's show you. We're going to travel a few more feet than the last couple.
All right.
All right, this one's more embarrassing, but I figure.
Rob, if you go ahead and set the tripod down, that video might stabilize a little bit for us. There you go. Great.
Better?
Yes, now we can see your mess more clearly.
Yeah, this is a mess. It's not what I want, but this is a case where we did not mow prior to using the rotary hoe. So it's just something for everybody to consider. Often with cover crops, we end up mowing things down first to cut down some of the bulk of whatever it is we're trying to incorporate. In this case, this is not a cover crop. These are weeds that we had in a crop that ended up failing for us. We just didn't get germination. Then we wanted to avoid working with it. And then we said, well, we better get it before the seed heads start setting. And we just ran the rotary hoe over it. And of course, it has done a decent job of terminating, but this is what it looks like when you haven't taken out some of the bulk of the cover of whatever it is you're trying to put in with the rotary hoe.
So will you run the disc over that to cut it up in a few days, or what's the next plan for this?
Yep, the disc is going to be the next thing. We'll probably let it dry out yet today. And assuming it doesn't rain, which is always a bad assumption, but we'll just assume that, then probably tomorrow we'll come out with the disc. If it looks like it's going to rain, then I may come out later today and say, well, it's not as dry as I want it to be, but I'm still going to run over it with disc.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to go back over this way. How are we doing for time, Liz?
Well, we're about the end of our time, but I want to see the rest of your spots, so keep going.
No, this is good. I think we just got it.
All right.
So are there any other questions for me?
People seem to like your videos. No further questions in the chat box. Is there anything else that you want to share that we haven't touched on yet?
I think probably the thing I would like to share is I'd like to put a little bit of a plug for Practical Farmers of Iowa Cooperators Program. The reason we're doing cover crops now is in large part to the interaction we've had through the Cooperators Program and the incentives of trying new things with something that's set up in a controlled fashion so we actually measure what we're doing. We probably would have tried cover crops anyway at some level, but I don't think we would have been quite as willing to try as much as we have. So for those who are watching who might be interested, if you're not a member of PFI, you should join PFI. And if you are a member of PFI, you should consider joining us in the Cooperators Program and try some of these new things.
Fantastic. Appreciate that, of course. And we'll have information about the upcoming Cooperators meeting in December coming out, in the next few months, but certainly check the PFI website. I do have a question here from Tony, and he was wondering, do you use your cover crops as mulch? For example, do you cut them and then place them around transplants, maybe as straw or leaving them as ground cover?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And the answer to that is we do not actively do that. We have used cover crops as a living mulch. But as far as cutting it and using it as mulch, the answer to that question is usually at the point when you're terminating cover crops, we're often unable to spend the time to collect and spread what we're doing. And part of the whole purpose too sometimes is to try and incorporate that biomass into the soil. So I guess it really depends. I mean, if you aren't looking to incorporate the biomass, if you can collect it easily, I see no reason why not. We have collected perennial grass and clover as mulch on our farm, and doing the same with an annual cover, for example, I don't see why that wouldn't be a good idea. Awesome.
Well, I'm gonna, I think, leave it here and just pull up a few of the last finishing slides on behalf of PFI. So thank you all on Facebook for attending. And if you want to rewatch or share with your friends, you can find the video of this event and many others on PFI's Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and our website. And you can also sign up using the link that Hannah posted in the comment box to receive day of event reminders for all of PFI's virtual field days for the rest of the season. And of course, we won't use that email address for anything else, and we won't sell it or give it away. So if you follow that link, we can get you those emails. And let's see. Don't worry, we will see more of Rob. I know he just kind of teased you with the fact that he uses cover crops under his crops. He does some intercropping, and we're going to talk about that at his upcoming field day on August 10th, and then another field day on August 24th, where he's going to talk about how he uses some cover crops for pollinators and for the poultry on his farm. So we hope to see you back then. Please fill out the evaluation. We really appreciate your feedback, and we'll enter your name to win a PFI water bottle that we'd be happy to mail out to you. But of course, the feedback is the most important part of that. And Rob, thank you again. And I don't think I have any other parting words. Rob, anything you want to impart? I know you already gave your cooperators meeting plug.
Nope, just go out there and use some cover crops.
Sounds good. Well, I hope next time we get to see some supervisors out on your farm. And give my best to Tammy. And until next time, everybody stay healthy and enjoy the sunshine and hopefully a little rain.